Okay, good morning and welcome to our latest the bar debate online. I know technically we can all meet up indoors these days, but as you'll see, we've got a slightly larger group. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't do. But we've also got an opportunity to taste some wines online this morning as well. And we're all going to be discovering or reaching into the world of Luberon. And so, I mean, we may all be very familiar with the Rhone and probably feel quite comfortable about what the Rhone can offer us. But today is really looking at what the Luberon can do and how familiar and what the opportunities there might be for actually one of what I think it claims to be the most diverse region in Rhone in terms of the kind of range of wines it can produce. Looking at my notes, apparently it produces 60% of rosé, 23% of reds, and 18% of whites, and currently sending around about 11% of their exports to the UK. And apparently last year, volumes to the UK were up by about 75%. So there's definitely growth and opportunities coming from the Luberon, and that's essentially what we want to try and do today. So joining me for our panel, I'm very pleased to welcome a nice mixture and diverse group of people as well. So Victoria Sharples, nice to have you on board, who's a wine consultant about to open her own wine bar in Hammersmith later in the summer. Noel Reid, who many of you will remember from his days at Robinson's, who's now ventured on his own and set up his own company, Rediscover Wines. So great to have you on board, Noel. Joshua Castle, who's head sommelier at Noble Rot, the award-winning restaurant in Soho and in London.
Free.
Exactly. Sorry. Yeah. Also from the sommelier world, we have Matthew Scarpassa, who's the head sommelier at Petersham Nurseries, and joining us from the same Zoom window, but actually two different companies. We have Tim Killen, who's from Alpine Wines, and Simon Lloyd, who's one of the directors of Lloyd's Wines, who's a wholesaler and retailer in the Chilterns. And last but by no means least, Matt Walls, who's a fellow wine writer and expert on the Rhone, who had been living in Rhone with his family before COVID. He's now returned to the UK. But anyway, welcome to you all. Thanks for all joining us this morning. Matt, I think you're going to kick off, aren't you, by just giving us a reasonably quick presentation on your thoughts on the Luberon to help set the scene. So,
yeah, certainly. Okay, thanks. Well, I'm just going to share my screen here. I can just run through this presentation fairly quickly. So, just to begin with, a few kind of the main points which make me think that the Luberon is a particularly interesting place. I suppose some of these might be considered a kind of USP, other of these points just might be just kind of important points about terroir. But these are Rhone wines, but they do have a particular personality. It's part of the Rhone family of vineyards, and I'll explain how it sits within the appellation framework in just a second. But I think what's particularly special about the Luberon is that all of the vineyards are within the Luberon Regional Nature Park. So it's a protected area, so very unspoilt terroir. The wines have a particular freshness and drinkability within the context of the Rhone. And part of this is due to the difference in day and night temperature, which is quite marked for the Rhone, which gives the reds and the rosés a particular sense of freshness. And the white wines, for me, are markedly different from the white wines of the rest of the Rhone. So they have a particular character all of their own. A lot of this is down to Vermentino, which is used quite a lot here, which is something that we're going to see in a couple of the wines that we taste coming up. And there is still a lot of great value to be found in the Luberon. Very few of the wines are very expensive, but I've personally found wines that are good value right from the cheapest wines up to those which are more expensive. So firstly, just to position ourselves. So this is the Southern Rhone, you can see within the red circle. So we're down in the Luberon, if you look at the red arrow. So we're in the southeast of the Rhone, so quite far away from the Rhone River itself. And there are a couple of other rivers which are more important when it comes to the terroir, which we'll look at in just a second. It's a very beautiful place. It gets a lot of tourist activity every year. It's very warm, very sunny, but it looks stunning. So visually, it's a very arresting place, partly due to the Montagne de Luberon, so a kind of high massif which runs from west to east through the center of the appellation. Ancient history of winemaking, vines brought by the Greeks, viticulture developed by the Romans, but really it's been since 1980, since 1981 really, with Chateau Laverie, that private domains have started popping up. And there are more and more all the time. They come in kind of successive waves, and now there are about 60 private domains within the Luberon. And it's not just a sea of vines. I think partly because this is a protected area in the nature park. They make in the Luberon about the same volume as wine as Châteauneuf, so they make quite a lot of wine. So it's about 3,300 hectares, which are made as Luberon every year, or certainly was in 2020. But it's much more spread out compared to Châteauneuf. So Châteauneuf is kind of almost monocultural vineyards these days. Luberon covers 36 communes, Châteauneuf covers 5. So it's much more spread out. So there's lavender, there's cherry trees, there's oaks, truffle oaks, almond trees. So there's a lot of different types of crop, and it's a bit more diverse in terms of what's grown there. And yeah, so biodiversity. So there's a large diversity of flora and fauna and restricted building regulations. There's no big city in the Luberon. There's lots of these little towns which are kind of the ancient towns and villages, have been there for hundreds of years, before any kind of regulations, before roads, before automobiles and the like. So they have this kind of real old world charm about them. So talking briefly about how the Luberon fits within the appellation structure. So people often talk about the wines of the Rhone, the wines of Côte de Rhône, as being something of a pyramid. So the base of the pyramid, you get generic Côte de Rhône, red, white, rosé. Then you move up into the second of 4 layers, which is Côte de Rhône Village. And then you get Côte de Rhône Village with a geographical name. So Côte de Rhône Village Sablé or Côte de Rhône Village Blanc de Dieu, whatever. There's 22 of those. And then at the peak of the pyramid, you get the crus. So you get Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Gigondas, often villages with their own appellation. Excuse me. Now, there are 8 kind of other Rhone Valley appellations, as they're known, which encircle the main growing area. So you can see the picture on the left, which has the crus and the central growing area, which is this one here, if you can see my cursor. If we zoom out, we can see those other Rhone Valley appellations which encircle the main growing area. So traditionally, these were kind of put even lower than in this base of the pyramid. But that's not a very useful way of looking at these appellations. These are big appellations, often. They vary in size, but Ventoux, Luberon, Costières-de-Nîmes, very big appellations, very spread out. So there's quite a lot of variety of styles within these other Rhone Valley appellations, but the quality runs everything from pretty basic kind of weekday wines. Some can be fairly forgettable, right up to wines which are every bit as good as the wines of Vacqueyras, Gigondas. You just kind of have to truffle them out, basically. A few stats. Birth of the appellation, 1988, so it's fairly new appellation. The surface area made as Luberon in 2020, as I was saying, 3,330 hectares. So about 14% of this was organic. So this is a growing number, so increasing amounts of organic viticulture, particularly amongst the private domains in the Luberon. Average yield about 48 hectolitres per hectare, and for a region which makes mostly rosé wines, you expect it to be reasonably high, but it's not massive. It spreads over 36 communes, 36 villages. The soil types are diverse, so it's mainly clay limestone. There are some outcrops of sands, towards the south of the appellation. And the further into the Alps you go, the more kind of heavy marls you get, it gets slightly wetter, climate gets slightly wetter. As we were saying, mostly rosé. This is an unusual split for the Rhone. I think, you know, most of us associate the Rhone with red wine, rightly, but here they make mostly rosé. They do make some red, and they make, okay, so they make less white wines than red and rosé, but still this is a lot for the Rhone. So nearly twice the Rhone Valley average white wines. A couple of quick notes on the terroir. So this map is north to south. So it's basically a large kind of oval-shaped growing area. The Montagne de Luberon peaks at about 1,125 meters down the kind of this high massif that runs down the center. The vineyards themselves don't go up that high. Most of the vineyards are between 200 and 500 meters altitude. And there's effectively two growing areas. So there's the area just south of the Calavon River. I don't know if can you see my cursor as it moves around there?
Yep.
So here is one growing area, slightly smaller growing area. And the vineyards do start to scale the mountain. So there is some possibilities of north-facing vineyards as well as south-facing vineyards. And the slightly larger growing area is here to the north of the Durance. So there's a bit more sand around this area here, more limestone as you get close to the mountain. Warmer towards the west and drier, slightly wetter and slightly higher altitude as you get towards the east, so later ripening here in the east. And it's very sunny, 2,700 hours of sunshine a year. But you get these diurnal temperature differences. So part of this is due to the altitude, and part of this is due to these two rivers which act as conduits for cold air from the Alps, which rush in from the east to the west. So that helps bring the temperature down at night, which ends up kind of resulting in kind of fresher wines, fresher aromatics in the wines. So the whites, they have to be a blend. Typical smorgasbord of Rhone varieties, Grenache Blanc, Bourguignon, Claret, and others. But the key, as I was saying before, to the white wines of the Luberon is Vermentino. So more commonly perhaps associated with northern Italy, it's a white grape which gives a particularly kind of zesty freshness and kind of citrusy aromas to the wines. So we should be tasting that. Hopefully in the white wines we're going to be tasting shortly. The rosés, again, need to be a blend. Plenty of grape varieties, local grape varieties to choose from. Some fairly well known, some not so well known. And the reds, again, have to be a blend. They have to contain the biggest part of the blend needs to be Grenache, Mourvèdre, Syrah, blend of those three, or just one of those three. And they also grow a little bit of Carignan, a little bit of Cinsault, a little bit of Marcelin, and they can use small amounts of whites varieties if they want in the blend. Who makes the wine? There are 10 cave cooperatives, 60 private domains, 30 négociants bottling Luberon. As I was saying, they make a lot of wine here, so volumes aren't a problem. Prices start low. The wines in the UK are typically between 10 and 20 pounds, a few a little bit more than that. And then just to recap, so they belong to the Rhone family of wines, but they do have their own style. That style tends to be a certain fresh drinkability, I would say. The wines are quite rarely heavy or thick like you can find in certain parts of the Rhone. They tend to be just a little bit more sprightly. All of the vineyards are within the Luberon Regional Nature Park, which I think is really one of the most important things to remember about the Luberon and the diversity of fauna and flora that brings. Those diurnal temperature differences bringing freshness to the wines, and they can be quite expensive. So there you go. That's an introduction to the Luberon and to the terroir. So Richard, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and hand over to you.
Thanks, Matt. That's very, very good. Thank you, and thanks for summing all that up in less than 10 minutes. Well done. Thank you. Can I ask you then? I mean, based on your experience and knowing the region, I mean, looking at how well it's understood, what would be your perception of the UK market and how well the Luberon is kind of like Clearly, we've seen it's starting to really push in terms of exports. But what would be your take in terms of how well it's perceived here?
Well, I mean, it's certainly developing. I mean, it depends whether we're talking about consumers or professionals. I think amongst professionals, it's a name that's beginning to gain a little bit of traction. I think some of the other Rhone Valley appellations like Pontou might be perhaps slightly better known, but I think after that, Luberon is starting to kind of become understood a little bit. I think it helps that so many people visit the place on holiday. As I was saying, it's a very kind of touristic area. Amongst consumers, I think, there's still a bit of a way to go before people recognise it in the same way as they recognise perhaps Gigondas or Vaqueiras or these more famous crews of the Southern Rhone.
Okay, great. And just going out to the panel, I mean, what would people's perceptions of the Luberon be if you were kind of like asked to sort of sum up what you feel the Luberon can offer? Or Matty, you mentioned earlier that you've actually been to the region. What's your take on the Luberon?
Yeah, I've been in the region 2-3 years ago. I mean, I did like the wines, and I've been trying and buying a few of them. For me, they offer this freshness and something that sits in between some Southern Rhone and Northern Rhone style, and I think is a very interesting style of the Rhone wines. And yeah, I do think they have this uniqueness for them.
Good. Victoria?
I was going to say, for me, I find it really interesting that they produce so much rosé, yet I never really consider rosé from the Luberon, which I think is interesting in itself. I always see it, as for reds, I think it's really interesting because they do that freshness. It's sort of Côte de Rhone with a difference, and they're always really good value for money, from what I've seen. I'm looking forward to trying the whites because I love Vermentino. And I think Vermentino, particularly around that Languedoc, southern French area, is really interesting. I think the one thing so far is that I don't ever really associate rosé and Luberon. So.
Yeah. Is anybody else want to thoughts on that?
Can I just throw in what Victoria just said there? Obviously, it's great to see the wines and the makeup of the red, rosé, white. But for most people, I'm talking about anyone going out buying wine, never mind the panel, they hear that Luberon's from the Rhone, they're expecting to buy red wine. And it's quite interesting to see that promotion-wise, in terms of what's being promoted, we haven't really heard, Victoria hasn't really mentioned or hasn't heard of the rosés. I'm not hugely familiar. I've seen a few when we've been at tastings in France, but in general, for a consumer, they're probably expecting to buy red wine. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, no. I must admit, when we first talked about doing this debate, I imagined that the conversation would be more about reds than rosés. So, Joshua, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they maybe get a little bit lost on the sort of fine wine market as well, because there doesn't seem for me to be a reference point into a sort of like cult domain, if you like, as there is in Aix-en-Provence, where there are a couple of names that sort of fit that bill, and that influence trickles down into the other wines of the region. And I think geographically where it is located, it's sort of betwixt sort of Provence and the Southern Rhone. And although it does all of those things really, really well, maybe consumers don't recognize it in that context because it's sort of a bit diluted. And then also, Matt, I think you mentioned, well, there's only sort of like 14% organic viticulture there as well. And I think it maybe misses out in that conversation as well. But yeah, certainly that's not to denigrate the quality of the wines, which are very good.
Yeah, but that sort of strange situation whereby you've got wines that are very good value, but potentially need a hand sell, which isn't always the case for a good value wine, isn't it?
They're definitely hand sell wines, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Maybe it's one of those things, Richard, that unless it's a fairly small appellation, it's really, I don't know what the representation is in the UK, but I'm involved in like the trade sales for our niche Alpine wines, and I think there's maybe some synergies with the stuff for Alpine wines and something like the Luberon, because it's a small area, it's people aren't familiar with it, and it requires quite a lot of effort to actually go out and to talk about the story behind the wine, like you say, the freshness, the diurnal range. I mean, something like the Luberon, to me, I've had 3 amazing holidays there, and my holidays are all built around wine quite naturally. And I think, it struck me when I was in the Luberon, it's everywhere you go, there's loads of Brits. So there's obviously a lot of people that are exposed to it, and then they come back from holiday, they might have flown down there. So unlike me with the estate car, which I used to load up with wine and bring back, they can't get access to this stuff. So it's kind of maybe encouraging, whether it's on trade or off trade, to think about how do you tap into that, emotional intelligence associated with the holiday experience. And maybe now is a brilliant time to do that for the Luberon, because there's an awful lot of people not going to France, who, I found this with Swiss wines. There's people that aren't going to their favorite Swiss resort or whatever. And so they're actually going into their local, they're asking for the wine. So just a kind of couple of observations.
And you are bringing in some Luberon wines. You've had success with some of the producers that you brought in.
Sorry?
You Alpine wines. Have you had some success in bringing some of the wines in?
We've had huge success. I mean, in terms of like in the last year, we've done various initiatives with things like the Wine Merchant Mag and what have you, and our reach and our growth with those kind of Alpine wines has, from particularly Switzerland and Austria, has grown exponentially in the last 12 months. But it is. I think it requires, quite a lot of effort and also engagement. I think something like the Luberon will score because it's different. When I go out and talk to a retailer or a wine bar or wine merchant or somebody in the on trade, often the last thing they want to do is look at a new region or a new supplier. But if there's a different story, if there's a different style of wine, people, consumers are becoming more curious. So I think the Luberon has got, they're not just doing what as Matt said, it's not just another Côte d'Aron. There's a lot of different USPs, and I know that's something, Richard, you want to explore during the course of the debate. So I'm really looking forward to trying the wines actually and seeing how they stack up.
Yeah. So Simon, you're obviously sitting in your shop there. So have you explored Luberon yourself, or is it something which your customers have been interested in?
I've been to the Luberon, and I've tried some of the wines. And we used to have a wine business in France, and actually stocked a few. And the guy started using these cement eggs, and the wine sort of lost its freshness a little bit. So, but anyway, I think it's really difficult for UK retailers to find these wines and to know a bit about them. And I think the likes of this debate and possibly the marketing people from Luberon could perhaps get their heads together and come up with some really good ways of introducing it more into the UK.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, as I say, obviously importers like Alpine, who have that kind of more, as I say, niche and exploratory range, potentially a good place to start. Well, should we kick off then? I mean, rather than just talk about the wines, we've got these wines sitting around us. Should we try the first? We're going to try the rosé. Obviously, it makes sense to start with rosé because that's what it's famous for. I think. So I think we're going to try and look at the Betula, the Marignan Betula 2020. So I don't know, Matt, are you able to talk us through the wines, or should we just?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do you want to just give us a taste? Give us sort of a kind of a benchmark on this and where this might sit amongst a typical rosé from Luberon, or? Yeah,
sure. Well, a couple of words on Marignan to start with. So Marignan they're a union of 8 co-ops, so they are a very big structure, a very big presence in Luberon. They make a lot of Ventoux as well. But generally speaking, in my experience, the quality tends to be high. The range is pretty broad, but I think this is one of their more, not their entry level, but it's a more kind of approachable pricing. I don't think it's available in the UK currently. So I would imagine by the time it got here, would it be in around £10 a bottle retail, I'm guessing. In terms of taste, it's pretty classic. I guess something that I often look out for when I'm tasting wines, white wines or rosé wines made from pretty big companies. I think, a are we tasting a lot of that kind of cold ferment banana thing, which can become quite dominating? No, we're not. You know, it's much more on the fruit. There's a nice sense of freshness. Again, kind of like raspberry red currant. It kind of it's like a little like raspberry leaf element, but there's no kind of vegetality. There's nothing like that you find in some inexpensive rosés. There's some length of fruit there. Personally speaking, I think very well made wine. It's fresh, it's balanced, and pretty good for the price. I would say this is pretty classic in terms of what you'd expect from an inexpensive Luberon rosé.
Right, okay, thanks. And any other immediate thoughts from the
Matt,
panel?
you mentioned the on that one. You said it was well priced. Are you able to reveal the price?
Me, I don't know the price. It's not available in the UK, so I'm literally guessing. I'm pretty sure this is more of their kind of entry level, and so you know, entry level for a large structure like this for a co-op in France. I would guess over there, you know, a few euros maybe to the trade. It would probably end up being closer to, I'm guessing, 10 to 12. I wouldn't like to guess though, because I don't know.
Well, I've seen it's around the £12-ish mark.
So €3 to €6 at base.
Oh, really?
Right.
Okay. So, okay, 12 to 15, depending where you are in the country.
So what do people think in terms of quality, in terms of value?
I think the quality is really there. I completely concur with what you said, Matt. And I think for the UK market as well, color with rosé does matter. And the color is really appealing. And the profile of the wine, it has enough fleshiness, but is also finishing really nice and dry. So yeah, actually a really, really lovely wine to kick off with.
The texture on this is interesting too, because you've got all the red fruits there, but you're getting a lot of creamy mouth feel, which you tend to put across with Provence. And you've got this sort of sweet, ripe fruit, which is very attractive. Then it just goes an extra level. So if we're talking entry level, it's probably over delivering.
I think for rosés from the southern region, for me, I mean, goodness knows how many Provence rosés we've all tasted, but I remember doing a tender and just tasting everything that there was around. And one of the things we struggled with was getting that consumer-driven, really delicate kind of nose. It's very, very fruity, but it's not overly sweet. It holds a tiny little minerality. Maybe you could do a little bit more, but in terms of consumers, they really, really enjoy it. It has a finesse without being too heavy. Okay, maybe it could brisk up a little more, but yeah, pretty good. And I was listening to the first conversation from Matt earlier about where these wines were placed, and I keep hearing the word Rhone, Rhone, Rhone. I keep knocking on my head going, really? You know, are they missing the trick? Is a misplaced loyalty here? They should be running south towards Provence, because for me, it's, you know, these are styled in that manner, in that way. And if ever there's an area on fire at the moment, you know, that's where you'd be throwing your weight into it, for me. That's
You're
a
right.
example of Provençal winemaking.
Well, we are very, very close to Côteaux d'Aix-en-Provence. If this is made next to the River Durance, to the south, then to the north, you're in Côteaux d'Aix-en-Provence. So we are very close. We are in Provence. You know, Provence is a big region. But I suppose
might be holding hands with the wrong name, as it were.
Well, I think when it comes to the rosés, can't really disagree with that. I mean, if you were to be given this blind and told this is a Côteaux d'Aix-en-Provence rosé, you'd say, yeah, sure. But I think once we get to the reds and the whites, then we might see a little bit more kind of a hand up to the Rhone as opposed to a hand down to Provence. But I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Should we taste the second rosé, and then we can perhaps explore where the rosés might sit within the market, actually, because I think that's what quite interesting part of the debate actually is the fact it is so close to Provence, where there might be a difference, or is there? So perhaps if we look at the second wine, which is the Chateau La Verrerie.
Chateau La Verrerie.
Yep.
It's their rosé.
Are you able to give us a thought on that, Mark?
Yeah, so Chateau de Verrerie was one of the first, if not the first, kind of fairly large private domain. So they're out towards the west, so they're kind of closer to the Rhone River. They got about 56 hectares, so pretty big estate. Generally speaking, interesting wines from top to bottom. Some of their wines are quite expensive actually at the top end. For Luberon, I think they stretch to like 30 something euros kind of. At that end, this is their more entry level. I think they sell this direct on their website for €11.50. So that's direct to consumer on their website. I don't think it's available in the UK, but that will give you an idea as to the kind of price.
Sorry, Matt, I missed that. What was the price there?
They sell direct to consumer on their website €11.50. So that'll give you an impression of the price. So it obviously will be a bit different by the time it gets to the UK. It gives you an idea.
The listings I've seen are around UK around £20 for this wine.
Right, that sounds about right. So stylistically a bit different. So still has a good sense of freshness. The acidity is well balanced. For me, there's a little bit more depth, a little bit more length of fruit. The fruit's slightly darker in character. I was thinking, if the first rosé we tasted was more of an aperitif wine, I think this could go quite happily with a light meal, with a picnic, with a meal on the terrace in the sunshine, that kind of thing. So yes, slightly different stylistically, bit more depth. What do people think?
Much more interesting for me. This has character. It has the nose is the nose is different to start with. You think, it's interesting. You sort of put your nose in a bit more, and it's got beautiful length, really good acidity. At 20 quid, God, I've seen some Provence at 20, which are outrageously overpriced. With this, for me, doesn't scare me. I think this shows real character. Lovely depth, and I drink that all day, all night. It's sort of a pre, during, and after.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it has that depth and it has that character to help it go with food. But I think you could drink it by itself as well. It's pretty versatile.
And throughout the year, I always bang on about rosé throughout the year, but that's the sort of rosé that's delicious, and it's more than just quaffing pale rosé. It has we can pontificate about and talk about it a lot more than the previous one.
And it's all certified. So I mean, I'm thinking if you take one of the sort of reference organic Provençal rosés, you've got like the Bamford Chateau Leaube. I think that retails at around about 20-24. So I think that's a bit paler, not quite as kind of meaty and textured as this one. But I think it shows that the price point on this is spot on, really.
Can I ask what everyone feels there? Because obviously with a commercial head on, when you're asking for quite high prices, £20 for a lot of people is an awful lot of money for a bottle of wine. Never mind if that was sat in a restaurant. And I guess if they go to, if they're buying a wine from Provence at 20 quid, it's almost that expectation. They feel they know what they're going to have. And to venture out and spend £20 on something which they don't really know the region. I'm just thinking commercially for them, unless they have the likes of you guys to hand sell that to them. It's very, very difficult for a person to take that gamble and pick a wine off the shelf if they're not familiar. When you start to get to 15, 20, £25, people very often will go back to what they know. They just fall back to type. So I kind of agree. It's a really interesting wine, but it's how you sell that wine. And that's, I guess, where you need hand-on expertise to do so. Otherwise, most people won't get a chance to taste it.
Mattia, your thoughts on this?
And I agree on the pricing, which is, I think, is important, and it's difficult to sell it without having someone to explain in it. It's a beautiful wine. I find it very round, very precise. The fruit is fantastic, and I think the price is right, but it's difficult to sell it if it's just presented there. And for me, it's interesting to see what the percentage of these rosé are produced by the cooperatives around the regions, and what are the reds production for the more privately owned wineries. I think that would be an interesting view.
Private domain.
More the estate wines, yeah.
Yeah, because for us, we like more. We spoke about the reds at the beginning, how we perceive as a red, but I think the red we perceive are more from the private estates, more top end style, whereas the rosé they don't get to the UK. Most probably they are consumed locally. That's a bit different. I mean, as a different selling.
So Joshua, can I ask you, I mean, if you're presenting rosés at Noble Rot, I mean, are people interested in rosé per se, or are they very specific about, I want a Provençal style, or is it?
Well, thankfully the sun's out this week, so rosé's been in hot demand. What I think is the most exciting point for rosé for us is a by the glass offering, and that is really focused in on like ticking what people would expect. So we do expect to come in and spend under £10 a glass, you know, £6 to £10 a glass on a dry classic Provençal styled rosé. If it says Provence, then even better. And so that's why I sort of echo Noel's point you made in terms of comparative pricing. You get it on by the glass and it's Luberon, but someone sort of wants to come in and just order a glass of Provence rosé. And then we'll offer stylistically different rosés, whether they're a more macerated style at a more premium price or whatever it is. But yeah, I think the semiotics really does matter with dry rosé, and therefore price matters as well.
Perhaps because, I mean, obviously the last couple of years, well, more than the last couple of years, Provence has just boomed everywhere, and obviously in America it's going crazy in America, and I know there's actual demand for rosé is probably outstripping supply to a large degree, and I think, you know, potentially for the UK, it's, you know, actually having an alternative to Provence, which is almost the same region, but not quite, but actually at a lower price point. I mean, potentially there's lots of ticks going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, and if the quality matches, you know, and it seems to be doing so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, when we're looking at demand and supply from Provence, I mean, what are people's thoughts in terms of actually being able to get what you want from Provence at the moment, compared to, and the opportunity of actually exploring something like Luberon as giving an alternative to what you may not be able to get from Provence?
For us, for a long time, we always made sure we had our allocation, as it were, as the world continues to want more. And the struggle always will be making sure you maintain pricing and having a good, strong relationship with the people that you purchase from. But I echo what you mentioned a moment ago, which is, as we said about the Provence holy hand bit, you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, having your mate over there on the road now, your mate down in Provence, and just using the wording that the consumer understands and help them understand where you're situated and help them understand how good the wines are. And yeah, associate yourself with them. Definitely, absolutely. And if there is I mean, I don't know what the in terms of production, what would be free for purchase in terms of what's consumed over there or what goes elsewhere, if there's much extra stock. But certainly they could ride that out, because the wines are lovely. They're very good. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, this one, I mean, the packaging on this is really smart. You know straight away, even the punt is a little bit different. If you're looking at, I understand the whole association with Provence rosé. There's also that tendency that you get that overkill, that everyone's like, not another Provence rosé. And this gives you something that's close enough, but not the same.
Yeah.
And when you've got something that's packed smartly, whether it's, if you're looking at a price point, whether it's on a wine list, on a shelf, and saying, well, it's almost the same price, but not quite, let's give it a shot. You know, you can, it's not a huge investment in the scheme of things. I don't know, I just think this is an opportunity where everyone gets, either, if it's hard to get hold of your Provence rosé, this is the opportunity for other areas, other markets or other regions to go, right, well, we've got the stock here, and take advantage of that. You know,
Yeah.
it's a bit like the restaurant that's closed whenever, it's like the restaurant that remains open when everything else is closed, COVID aside. You know, you've got that opportunity that if you're there, you've got to be there. So I think you've got to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think they're exporting about a quarter of their production at the moment. I think 3/4 obviously staying in France. So there's clearly some balance there, or opportunity if they see that opportunity for export.
Can I ask Matt on that? I mean, is that based on the huge amount of holiday trade? Do they need that? Is it something that's so important to them at Celador and they get such great pricing that they wouldn't, put that elsewhere? Because the likes of buyers in the UK probably won't give them the premiums they like or would expect at the Celador. I mean, I imagine that's a huge part of their business.
It is, yeah. I mean, the Luberon being a pretty big area, there's huge amounts of tourism. During the summer, so many restaurants, people on the terraces, the villages are packed full of people, and the rosé is just being drained from the tanks by the tourists. So, prices are pretty good. And maybe this is what holds back the Luberon a little bit in terms of consumer recognition in the UK and other markets, because they can quite easily sell quite a lot of it where they are. They don't have to go through the hassle, particularly even more hassle now, of exporting to the UK. But it's a bit of a shame because, there's some nice wines for UK consumers to enjoy here. I think what I was saying earlier on about the amount of rosé that is made in the co-ops compared to private domains. I think in private domains, that's where you see a lot of the reds and whites. I think you made a good point there, Mattia. And but a lot of this rosé is made by the co-ops because at the moment, it is a very strong commercial proposition to be making rosé. But I would also think that particularly because of the problems we've had recently with the pandemic, there's less tourism, so there's likely to be more availability of rosé, but that's for Provence and the Luberon. So I think there's kind of a lot of availability kind of all around in these kind of quite touristy wine producing regions.
Can I ask one more on that? You may not have the answers to hand, so apologies, but just looking at, when I looked at the price points here and we looked at the amount that was being sold to the UK, which I think was 12%, which is still a fair amount of wine. Is there any breakdown of how much of that is being bottled from co-ops and being sold at a price point through supermarkets here, and what is actually coming through as domain wine for sales? Because my interest would be, as has been mentioned, a lot of that will maybe perhaps is rosé at a certain price, but do we have an average price point for the Luberon that's sold in the UK? Is there any kind of info on that?
I'll just have a look at my notes of what I've got. I can't see one, but I know what's interesting actually is that I think that 12% in the UK, I know that there's been a 75% volume increase in the last year. So that would potentially indicate to me the challenge there's been from Provence in terms of supply, whether or not some more of the canny bigger buyers have been looking at the Luberon as a way to, I don't know, I'm just surmising, but that 75% increase in the last year would make you think that they're not getting as much Provence as they want, and they've been looking at alternatives.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can certainly look at the average price point for when we do the write up. Yeah,
I don't have access to those figures now.
Almost about Peter Mayle country here. Did we not mention earlier about this part of Luberon is actually more where Peter Mayle, that whole imagery comes from?
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean the whole film, they talk about the Peter Mayle effect, don't they, in the Luberon, and that's what.
Well, we always think about Peter Mayle as Provence. That's the other irony, is that actually it's not Provence, it's actually here.
That's a really good point, Richard, because particularly when you're thinking about the rosés, is people have read the book or seen the movie or whatever, and they're wedded to that image. And in that, look, they don't care about the classification or the appellation or whatever. In their mind, that's the Provence. They'll see, Marion Coutard and Russell Crowe prancing around and all the lavender fields, and to them, that's Provence. So, maybe we are missing a trick when we talk about this. We don't have to talk about it being, a Côte de Rhône rosé. It's the Provence style of rosé from the Goodyear country. A Goodyear country. I mean, like, what's not to like about that?
And
this is a Provençal region. I mean, there's some discussion as to kind of what is Provence. I mean, there's no kind of official definition of where Provence is, but I think Luberon could be described as in Provence. These wines are Provençal, but it's not in AOC, Côte d'Aix-en-Provence, for example. So, we can say that these wines are Provençal, I think, quite legitimately.
Yeah, and whatever that average price point is, it's definitely at a very competitive level of price point, even with the wine, the second wine here, which is obviously at a higher level. Should we change tack and then head towards the whites and then see how the whites compare, contrast, and what the whites are offering? So I think the first white we're going to go for is the. Where are we now?
Can I ask one quick question? Just
yeah,
picking up on sort of what Victoria was saying about bottle shapes and designs. I know we moved on to white, but I'd be really interested to see what people think in terms of, does bottle shape matter, i.e. Bordelaise or Burgundy style bottle for rosé to consumers?
I think rosé is the only category at the moment where you can find all sorts of color shapes and satin bottles, and as long as they're presented pale and dry, the color that shows the color, they're really selling. And I think you can see it's the only style in the shops, so then you can find all different shapes and colors there. So for me, I don't think it's for rosé. I think it's okay to have a different style, and I don't think it's anything. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. In Provence, they don't have any particular law or anything to say they have to put in a Burgundy bottle or anything.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, at the end of the day, people who seem to enjoy rosé seem to be less, concerned about what shape the bottle happens to be, as long as it's, as you say, pale and dry and tasty. Although I agree with what Victoria said earlier, because that it does look really classy. That bottle does make a difference. So maybe there is a little premium end there where people will go, oh, you know what? It's a little bit more expensive, and oh my goodness, it really is presented very well. But certainly, I think for mainstream customers, I'm with yourself there, Matty, where it's kind of it's less important than for other wines. That they all look really well presented, these bottles, to be fair. Yeah.
So if we go over to the white side, I think is it the Chateau, the Sylvain Moret we're starting with?
Yeah, so we're going to kick off with that. So that's this one here. So it's the Bastide du Clos is the name of the domain. Is the winemaker. So Sylvain Maury is the son of Jean-Marc Maury of Chassagne-Montrachet. He started his own estate in the Luberon in 2002. He's now got about 15 hectares, various different parcels around the southern part of the appellation. So this particular wine, a blend of lots of different grape varieties. So we have some Grenache Blanc, Vermentino, Uni Blanc, Viognier, Clairette, Roussanne, Marsanne. But for me, it's a wine that I like a lot. It's a wine that I actually, when I bought when I was living very close to Luberon when I was down there. For me, it has a particular elegance that I really enjoy.
Has that classic white Rhone. So going from Provence, suddenly we've gone straight north, east, and suddenly go, this is what the joy is when you have all those blends, those different varietals. You're getting a lot more, for me, a more interesting wine. But it's weird, you can almost see that there's a Burgundy element there going on too. It's beautifully textured, lots of spice, great length. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a nice kind of sense of intensity. It's quite a precise wine. For the Rhone, sometimes we expect really kind of big, broad whites, but that's not always the case. And we can see that with this one. It has that kind of sense of precision and drinkability about it, which I really enjoy. But as you're saying, it's the blend of these different varieties which starts to kind of build up a bit more kind of local character, a bit more kind of Rhone character, I think.
I do appreciate the bitter finish, almost a very dry finish in the end of the palate. It makes it very easy to drink another glass.
Good food one, isn't it? It's definitely got that kind of, like, as you say, that depth to it, which still going on, in terms of what's coming through.
That character, and it kind of gives it that lovely length, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, do we have no idea of the price on this? Because I mean, if this is going to be around the same sort of price, obviously it's not an ex-seller's price, but if they're punching this out sort of like eight, nine at the cellar door, and it's obviously considerably less for an ex-seller price, but then you've got duty and stuff to factor in. That to me looks like a really good 25. Yeah.
Well, I think this is available for £15.50 in the UK. Last time I looked at Carrington's, which I think is in Manchester, it was £15.50, which I think is pretty good value for one of this class.
Yeah. If you like those style of, if you're somebody that likes this almost reminds me more so than a Rhone white blend. This reminds me of some of the great Rhone white blends of South Africa. When you look at like some of the kind of like Rocking Horse and Donovan Rahl and people like that, it's got that style to it because it's got that extra freshness that you don't always have in the Rhone. I think it's wonderful.
I can't get past the Murray connection because you can just tell, somebody who's produced Chablis and what have you. It's it has a real kind of taut, tight finish. It doesn't become blousy. It's got lots of power, but it's held really well. Wonderful mineral, lovely, lovely spice. It's delicious, really, really lovely.
This is the sort of wine, anything with a blend, again, something I'm always passionate about, whether it's coming out of the northeast of Spain, around the Rhone, this is where they become so compelling as a drink. And it's more than just a white wine that happens to be from southern Rhone. They're the sort of wines that you have a taste and you go, oh, that's really, I want to drink more. You want to almost dive into the glass because there's a lot going on. There's that lovely complexity. It's just a spice.
Yeah. And is that typical for you? Has it got that typicalness, typicity, I can't hardly say the word, for the Southern Rhone, for where it is, or?
Matt, what would you say?
Directed at me, sorry. I would say that this is typical more for the Luberon. I would say that tasting this, it has that slightly elevated acidity. It has that slightly kind of grapefruit bitterness from the Vermentino. I think this is the one that takes quite a lot from Vermentino. About 25% of the blend is Vermentino. And I think a bit of that freshness, a bit of that citrus skin, and a bit of that pithiness. So for me, I would position it in the Luberon more than the Rhone generally, but sure, I mean, it certainly kind of fits within the Rhone family as well, or certainly it's kind of Southern Rhone family of whites.
And excuse my ignorance, but in terms of the blend, is the blend versus single varietal, or what's the sort of the normal approach?
Well, in the Southern Rhone, it's to blend. So you're looking at Grenache Blanc, Claret, Marsanne, Roussanne, Bourbon. But then there's a whole host of other potential varieties you can use depending on the appellation a little bit. But yeah, the tradition certainly in the Southern Rhone is to blend. In the Northern Rhone, it's not to blend. In the Southern, it's to blend.
Josh, your thoughts on this in terms of what you're expecting?
Yeah, I think the comparison that Victoria made to northern Spain's interesting because I guess this would sort of be a blend, or at least Grenache Blanc would certainly be something that would feature in that sort of region. The palate kind of silkiness is really lovely. It says Southern Rhone, but without getting too heady, which is really nice. So it's got that sort of spine of acidity to keep it alive and keep it sort of standing up. So yeah, very promising.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on this one? Simon, Tim?
Yeah, it's a lovely wine. It's very, very herbal, reminiscent of fennel. It's just got that, you mentioned the flora and fauna. It fits perfectly with that. It's a great, fresh, easy, lovely style. Beautiful. Yeah. If you can get it for 15 quid, that is a steal. I'd be selling that for 20, 25, I think. Yeah, and I think I said before, it's, for me, loads of complexity, lots of layers there, and it's reminiscent of Southern Rhone style blends that I've had from places like some of the best producers in South Africa that are 25, 30 pounds a bottle retail. So I think this offers tremendous value and quality.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned the blends there from South Africa, because I mean, yeah, that's some of the great whites that really, really stood out from South Africa have been the blends, haven't they, in terms of what they've been doing there. Should we look at the second one then? I mean, the second wine is the Doria.
Yeah, as well.
Where are we?
So, shall I say a few words?
Please, yeah, sorry, yeah, go on.
So again, we're moving back to Maranon, which, as I mentioned before, is the union of 8 different co-ops based in Luberon. So this is more of one of their top end wines. So it's a Selection Parcellaire, so single vineyard wine. It is a blend of, I think let me check my notes, mostly Vermentino, I think. 60% Vermentino, 30% Grenache Blanc, 10% Roussanne. Quite low yielding, 30 hectoliters per year. And it is, so the alcoholic fermentation, 20% in oak barrels, 30% of those are new. So I think it's interesting to see how Vermentino in particular and how these white blends interact with oak. Generally speaking, I think there is a certain kind of synergy between the two. I think the two can work, and it shows the breadth of styles actually that you can find in the white wines of the Luberon. So I think everyone will agree it's quite different stylistically.
Yeah.
Still has that acidity though, and you can see where the terroir and just the geographical location is making an impact on the wine, because you get that really great sort of gummy, pithy acidity, which you see it in both. But yeah, this is a very vastly different style.
Yeah, so the oak really gives it that a bit more richness, a bit more silkiness on the palate, but you still get that kind of citrus peel, citrus pith, acidity, as you were saying. So it's still, you still get the sense of place, I think, with this one.
Remind me of some of the Vermentino that you can find from Tuscany, a bit more broader and richer than probably Ligury or other north of Italy side. But yeah, it has the freshness, and I think sets it apart a little bit from the rest of Southern Rhone, because Southern in Vermentino is not so widely used, and that's the freshness and lemoniness in it, which is quite unique to the Luberon, I think.
In terms of competition, it's interesting actually that you're the first person to have mentioned Italy. Vermentino we find most commonly in northern Italy and central Italy, but it's the first time we've heard Italy as being a competitor. We've heard South Africa, which I think is a really good point. Also northern Spain, which I think is also good point. Good to hear that. Because stylistically, there's some differences, some similarities. Sorry, in the whites. So where else are we seeing kind of competition for wines?
I guess the Vermentino from sort of the south of Bordeaux, Armagnac, Cognac territory, but obviously that's not a question for the still wines or the non-brandy wines. Sorry, but yeah, I don't know the point I was making there. Sorry.
No, you mean I thought southwest France. I think there's some wines like Saint-Mont, which have a richness but also a freshness and some acidity. I think there's some similarities there. Inexpensive, also not terribly well known. So I thought, yeah, I was thinking same part of the world.
I was also thinking that some of the Vermentino that I've had on from Corsica, we often find those quite sort of mineral styles of Vermentino, but often you pay more of a premium for those Corsican styles. So I think the Luberon could use their price advantage.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think Corsica is a great point. Not only are the grape varieties quite similar, but there's some kind of similarities in style as well. But as you say, often a bit more expensive.
Yeah, I get the impression that these whites as well, bottled under cork, could continue to benefit from a couple of years age. They're not going to really sort of fall off a cliff in 6 months. And I have a suspicion that the closure probably has sort of like helped that, at least in my impression, or allowing the wine to develop in a positive way for the next couple of years. There's none of that screw cappy reduction. There's none of that sort of like colder fermentation sort of being trapped in the bottle. So the wines feel like they're sort of sitting back and relaxing into themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
And the reason why there is so much Vermentino Is that to do with the heat, or what's the Vermentino? Why is it such a high proportion of Vermentino in this area?
It's a good question. I think it's partly just a historic thing. It's partly due to the proximity with Provence, where they grow a bit, proximity to northern Italy. So it's partly that, and also it's very happy in the hot climate.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned.
It retains its acidity, crucially, in fairly hot climates.
Yeah.
Good.
So, you can start see some Vermentino in California and cropping around the world because it really likes quite warm climate, but it retains the acidity, which a lot of other grape sort of loses quite quickly. Yeah, for me, it's also the first one is remind me of some like Campania with like some Fiano in it, some very fresh Fianos in it, which could be quite this like grassiness and the sort of sense of southern Mediterranean aromas which could carry through that.
No, your thoughts on the wines, the white wines in particular?
Yeah, they're very different in style, and I guess if you're somebody who loves that big, powerful, rich style, the second one is perfect for you. And there's lots of competition around the world with big Chardonnays and what have you, just as a direct competition in terms of style. Somebody who wants that richness. Personally, I've really enjoyed further the other style, and even seeing if they can make it leaner still and fresher still. I think there could be another trick there for them, to really get that Vermentino to shine. But they're very, very good. Yeah, very, very good.
Yeah, and in terms of the winemaking, Matt, I mean, is this, in terms of like minimum intervention and sort of more natural style winemaking, is this an area where you see a lot of that coming through, or not?
A little bit. I think with a lot of the private domains are kind of moving towards organic viticulture. So although, it may only be 14% of the volume of the whole of the Luberon, I think if you were to look at just the private domains, the percentage of organic viticulture among them would look much, much higher. In terms of natural styles, you don't see that much, or certainly I personally haven't encountered that much. There are a few small producers like Guillaume Gros, who is kind of towards the natural end. But compared to, say, Ventoux, where there's a lot more kind of experimentation and creativity, I would say that the Luberon is probably generally a bit more conventional, generally speaking.
Okay. Well, should we crack on with the reds then, since what the Rhone is normally famous for? Shall we see how the Luberon reds shape up? I think the first one here is the Grog, isn't it? Let's look.
This is the Russell Crowe.
This is Russell Crowe. So this is where it's made. This is where the film was made. I think Chateau de la Conorgue.
This is not their top cuvee. Their top cuvee.
All those planning your holidays, this is where you need to either go to or avoid, depending on how you might think.
If you follow the cheesy story of the movie, it's all about some declassified vines, and they had a wine called Coin Perdu, the lost or forgotten corner, which is like a garage wine, and they make a lot of money out of selling the Coin Perdu to all the tourists who think they've got this really rare garage wine, but it's actually made commercially in the winery.
I was just interested in what you mentioned a moment, Matt, about that they're slightly more conservative, traditional. Just as I was, opening the bottles, I noticed there's only 2 of those under DM cork. I'm just wondering, is that the case there, whether in terms of how they produce, they're still in that kind of, we want to keep it very real, rather than maybe accepting Diam will protect their wines. I mean, I'm not against, as it were, just standard natural cork at the top level. But I'm just wondering, is that something that hasn't been fully embraced there yet, or is it something they consider?
Sorry, you lost me slightly.
With Diam, I've just noticed that there's only a couple of them under Diam. It may just be one producer, actually. Let's have a look.
No,
is it the two rosé?
Which which is broadly, you know, a very positive sign. I think, you know, it goes to show that they really care about the quality. They care about exactly how the wine presents itself. They care about the consumer experience, which I think is all very positive. And you know, you see screw cap a little bit, but it's still pretty rare in the south of France. I think, particularly for wines such as these, which are sold quite a lot in the local market, screw caps are still not popular at all in France. So, but good to see that, you know, they are nonetheless moving towards DM and other types of closure, which you know, can give that good quality, reliably good quality experience. So this is the first of the reds we're going to taste. So this is Chateau La Candorgue. It's in a hilltop village called Bonnier, which is one of the most beautiful places I think I've ever been to in my life. It's just a stunningly beautiful place. You can see why it's been used as a film set so often. But you know, these guys, they don't rest on their laurels. They don't just kind of sell it on the scenery. I think the wine itself is very good. So this is a blend of Syrah Grenache with a little bit of Carignan. It is 50% whole bunch and aged in kind of large old oak. And this is a wine, again, which I like very much. It's unmistakably Rhone for me. For me, it's the Syrah which really comes out aromatically. And on the palate as well, it has that kind of fine-boned effect. You can feel the sense of freshness, that sense of altitude.
Lovely blue fruit.
It's really
Yeah,
good.
there's gorgeous like restraint on the wine and a lovely attention to the tannin, which just actually really surprises me. Mine's a little bit reticent on the nose, but as soon as it got on the palate, it just pops with that very Syrah flavor. So yeah, quite a nice surprise actually.
There's that slightly kind of serrated effect from those Syrah tannins that really sit in the center of the tongue there.
Yeah.
Lovely concentration, lovely intensity. A wine that will age easily for 10 years, I would imagine.
I think this is a wine that really benefits from that wide diurnal range that you talked about, Matt, earlier. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you go across to some of the other villages in Gigondas and Baccarat, Sablé, sometimes it's just so hot there and they don't get that wider diurnal range, and the fruits just become very jammy, and sometimes the winemakers just end up making them overly extractive. And I think the acidity and the freshness here really contributes to the balance of the wine.
Absolutely. You can't make Syrah like this in Gigondas, Baccarat, Châteauneuf. No way. I mean, this is much more akin to Northern Rhone Syrah, actually, in its freshness, in the bone structure, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like it a lot. And it's currently available at Yap, and it's $16.75 retail.
Brilliant. That's great value.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember when I visited the region, a couple of other wineries, not here today. For me, the reds, they really sits in between the southern Rhone and the northern Rhone. As I said at the beginning, the style is fresher, but it's not as parfumey as maybe a northern Rhone. So for me, they have this uniqueness to them, and they can age very well. And I did try the rosé from the Gamaroche, and it's beautiful. It's a bit darker, deeper style, but it was very, very nice.
Yeah, the white Syrah as well.
It feels just really kind of laid back, you know, as if they haven't had to try too hard. You know, it's very natural way the process has been. There's loads of strawberry and herbal notes, and it's just delicious. Really, really lovely. I always like when I see a wine, when I open a wine like that, where it doesn't feel overly manufactured. You know, it's done the job in the vineyard. It's done the job within the winery, and they just almost let it create itself. It feels it's really lovely.
And just looking on the back, it does look like it's eco-cert as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, they were the first winery, private domain in the Luberon to be certified organic, I believe.
Is this a biodynamic one? Is one of these biodynamic?
I don't believe
Can't read
this is.
French fluently, but it seems to say that on the back label it has some biodynamic methods or...
Yeah, I'm sure these guys use those methods. Might be wrong.
Yeah, I don't think they're certified biodynamic, but certainly kind of moving in that direction.
Yeah, for me it's interesting. Like, at 14.5% alcohol, it still has the freshness whereas you can find some like Southern Rhone at 14.5 that could tendentially be more rounded and fuller body style. Definitely is. I can feel less of the Grenache influence in here, the meatiness and more the Syrah freshness in it. A different style.
Yeah, I think that whole organic biodiversity is definitely an area where they're trying to push. And there's just, do you know, Matt, this sort of Valeur de Parc idea, this new kind of brand that they're kind of trying to launch is more about promoting wines made from the regional natural parks, which I guess helps with that whole imagery of the nature of Luberon as well.
Yeah, I think this is a kind of quality mark that they're kind of not for wines made in natural parks or something along those lines.
Yeah,
it's the first one that for me expresses that. We make some wine out in Spain, and it has that. It's the same thing. It's a park which you can't use herbicides, pesticides, etc. You can feel that in the wine through the soils. And this is the first one that really gives that kind of herbaceous, fauna, flora kind of idea. You kind of feel it in the wine. Very impressive.
Well, it's hard to move on from this wine actually, but shall we go to what actually is our last wine of our lineup? But there's certainly some wines here we can all go back to later in the day. So the last wine, Matt, if you've got your
This is Chateau de Verrerie again. So this is their Haute Colline. So I think this is for them. It's kind of like on their mid-range. The rosé we tasted from them was kind of entry level. This is their mid-range. They have some kind of top-end wines which retail for around 30, kind of towards £40. So this, I had a look on their website. I don't know if it's available in the UK currently, but on their website, they're selling direct to consumer for €15 per bottle. So that would no doubt translate at something, a little higher than maybe between 20 and £25 in the UK, I'd guess. But that will be up to them, up to whoever brings it in. So in terms of the blend, again, Grenache Syrah, primarily, like so many of the red wines of the Luberon. So 49% Syrah, 44% Grenache, 7% Carignan. So this is harvested at night and vinified by grape variety before blending. There's cold maceration for 5 days, and then fermented at fairly low temperature, 18 to 25 degrees for 20 to 25 days, and then matured either in concrete vats or oak barrels, and light filtration before bottling.
Again, you're getting a lot of wine in your glass, like their rosé. There's a lot there, much more inky and tarry in character. Far more, much more powerful wine, and it does have that very. To me, it reminds me some of the Provence reds I've seen and shipped before, where you get the sort of earthiness and inkiness. You don't see it very often, but I can see there's a slight hint. It's almost a crossover between Provence reds and somewhere in the Rhone. I'm not quite sure where. Somewhere we've got some nice inky blue character.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And for me, although the blend isn't far off what we had in the previous red wine, you said Grenache much more, both on the nose and particularly on the palate. It has that kind of characteristic Rhone Grenache generosity on the palate.
Have they got old vines there with Grenache?
At Luberon, so this was planted, they started planting around 1980. So for Luberon, the vines would be quite old, so 40 years old for some of the vines, so fairly old. And they've continued to plant after that. So some would be old, some would be a bit younger.
Sure.
But yeah, it has that depth and that kind of sense of vinosity that you'd expect from older vines.
Again, the Dana range here really strikes me that it really tempers some of that alcohol. Yes, of course, you can feel the perception of higher alcohol in the mouth, but I think it feels a notch lower than it would be if it was further west in the Rhone. And I think that's actually a really nice feature of the wine, because without that, I think it again would feel too heavy. I'm also liking the sort of early signs of some sort of like tertiary notes coming through, because I noticed it's a 17 vintage, so it's just a little bit of development coming through. If anything, I'd almost be inclined to give this a bit longer, because I think it's already showing great promise. And the other thing that I was going to say is I hadn't noticed on the vintage, but the Canorg is just a 19, and I can't think of many Côte de Rhônes that I've drunk of 19 that I've enjoyed as much as that in terms of its freshness and approachability. So I think that's another tick for the Canorg.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think you do sense the alcohol in this wine slightly more in the Verrerie, but it is that the freshness from the aromatics and that slightly heightened acidity that you might get here compared to, say, Vacqueyras, that gives it, that helps balance out that alcohol a little bit.
I think it's the kind of wine which is very easy to get wrong. You know, with that amount of power, this could be, you know, over the top, you know, enormously alcoholic. Yet it seems to stay very pure. Yes, it's a big wine, but it keeps itself together. It still has some real class, and lovely fruits, real pure fruits in it. So it's a really good effort.
Yeah,
Good to see some Carignan in there as well. So I think part of the acidity it's probably getting is from some Carignan, and I think there's a bit more interest in the region now with some of the more kind of more traditional older varieties, things like Cinsault, things like Counoise. Some of these older varieties that have been in the Rhone for much longer than Grenache, actually, and that can help balance out the high alcohols that you can get from Grenache. So I think that's probably a step in the right direction for the region as well.
Thought from you, Josh, on the second red.
Yeah, it's sort of nice because I guess the Rhone, we've got these very clear hierarchy distinctions, right? You know, is it an appellation wine or is it a Côte de Rhône? Whereas these definitely seem to be punching well above Côte de Rhône, but seem to be probably in sort of Côte de Rhône-like prices, but without the need to be, oh, I'm an appellation wine, so I'm going to be a little bit oakier, and we're going to be a little bit less broachable. So it's sort of, maybe that's the middle market is, you know, approachable, but generous and completely full of flavor. Yeah, I think, although this wine isn't to my preference, that's not to say that the quality isn't really there, which it is. And there is, yeah, as someone said before, lots of wine in the glass, which is great value.
Brilliant. Thanks. I mean, in the time I've got left, I mean, I must say, you know, of the 6 wines we've tasted, you know, you can often taste 6 wines in a you know, rosés, white and reds, and not quite get, from my point of view anyway, that level of consistency and quality. Just some general thoughts really on the overall perception that you've had in terms of tasting the wines, and then what you kind of thought when you first joined this session, whether it kind of matches to what you expected or different.
Shockingly good. It's fantastic. Great wine. Really good.
Yeah, I was very impressed by the whites. I mean, I tasted the reds before, but the whites really surprised me. Yeah, no, I think the quality was there also in the rosé, which are more on the entry level, the terrific wines. I think it's just a bit of image problem at the moment.
Yeah.
Trying to put where they want to be, whether they want to be a land of rosé or
So
quality red.
Each wine has its own story. Well, each category has its own story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Richard, if I may be so bold as to say, I think the wines are good enough and they're priced low enough for both on and off trade customers to actually push their margins on it, because they are probably things that you do need to hand sell and talk a bit more about. But I think actually the consumer, if they've been hand sold it, and I trust the sommelier's recommendations, I'd be interested in say what Josh's view is, that actually you could push the margin a bit, because I think they will still deliver excellent value and give an opportunity for the consumer to have a new experience, but also for the retailer or the on-trade customer to actually make a bit more margin.
Yeah, I mean that's very much what Provence are hoping to do, aren't they? With their reputation, they're looking to try and push their margins as well. So it kind of fits in nicely with that. But they're potentially starting from a slightly lower base as well in terms of the price point. So just a thought on, from your points of view as buyers, talking well to the region and to producers. I mean, what would be your kind of main takeaway in terms of what you would like them to do more, or perhaps the best strategy for them in terms of coming to the UK?
I think the good news for them is they have lots and lots of options to work on. We're not scratching our head thinking here, what can we pull out of the bag? they have a lot to work on. I mean, commercially, if they want to sell volume, you know, the easy win with the rosés is a no-brainer. There's little connections there which are down the road, and if they work on that and play that story with the roses, they've got the wines there to take some of that pie. With the reds, I think as Simon mentioned, I mean, those reds sit along top end Rhone wines. They're tremendous. You know, and with that kind of value, they need to maybe to push that story. You know, compare them with, you know, you shouldn't say Chateauneuf and what have you, but you know, they're expensive wines, and these can easily sit alongside the best of the Rhone. But I'm most excited about the whites. I think the whites with the amount of varietals they can use, with the options they had, they've shown us 2 examples there. I would like to see commercially a lighter style again, which is more customer focused, more customer friendly, widen the audience, buy the glass. I think they got a real winner there. I think there's a lot they can do with the whites. I love the whites from down that region. Yeah.
No,
That's really well summed up. Victoria?
I agree with Noel that I think the whites are really interesting. I think the one issue that is sort of an ongoing issue is that because what is Luberon? If you think about, particularly at the cheaper end, if a consumer wants white wine, they generally will either say a grape varietal rather than a region. There are a few exceptions. So how do you let the customer know what is Luberon, especially when you've got a range of 5, 6, 7 different varietals, and blends are not the norm. They're still seen as something possibly not as good because you can put more in to get a better flavor. I think there's a lot of misconception of what a blend can provide. In reds, it's different, but whites, it becomes a real issue. And then they go, oh, but hang on, they don't have anything to hang on to. So you either have to say, well, you know, like the second of the whites, that's quite Chardonnay-like. Okay, so you got to find those little hooks and signposts, because otherwise you've got a region that's not really known. I mean, as soon as you say Peter Mail, you're in Provence, I go, oh, okay, you've got something there, and you've got a park, you've got this really unique site, an area, which should be shouted about more so because it is so special and unique, and they're providing or generating particularly good wines at good prices. But so red is red, that'll sell itself, and we can say great, and it's good value, and it looks like a Rhone, but it's better value than a Rhone. The whites are more complicated, and I think this is where it becomes exciting, but that's where you've really got to find a clever way to get that story across. And I don't think you can just say, you know, it's a Pinot, whatever the cool white grape is right now. How do you bring those people drinking that to this? Are they going to be those people? But I think longevity-wise, the whites have got great acidity. They're ageable, have good ageability, and you know, I like them under a cork. I think it's refreshing to see they still using that. And the rosé on both sides, you've got the sort of inexpensive, great tick the boxes. And if Provence can't supply, Luberon can. But then you've also got some really interesting rosé, which makes me excited. So.
Yeah, I guess the appellation is actually only 1988, which surprised me. Actually, I didn't realise it had only been going since then. I mean, Matthew, your thoughts? I mean, in terms of if you were looking to bring any of these into the Petersham, what would you be talking to producers about?
Well, I think for me it would be mostly for my interest and for the selling story, it would be mostly the white and the reds. It would be very interesting to see how they play there. I can see the style is very interesting, and I think for the by the glass options, they can be sold easily by the glass, which is a good way to sell. The rosé, obviously, they would be more difficult, but there would be more competition for the Provence. And I think, I don't know, the differentiation between the sort of entry level and the premium story should be more defined, where they're coming from, who is who produces and what. There's a bit more differentiation needed there, from like the stories of new producers coming through and a different style. The focusing on the white and the red, which is fairly new, I think is something to work on.
Great, thank you.
From an on-trade perspective, I'd say reds and whites are more exciting for me as well. I think that like organic viticulture is really important to consumers, and I would love to see producers continuing to focus on that. But yeah, I also, you know, if these wines do age well, which structurally they should do, it would be fascinating to see if producers have library stock that they could introduce into the UK market for keen prices for targeted restaurants, to generate maybe a bit of interest and value in the potential ageability, collectability, and drinkability of the wines. So,
brilliant. Okay, and finally, well, not finally, actually, Tim and Simon, can I ask you your?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I was pleased and happy with all the wines across the range. I think they're very good wines that they could be marketed a bit better, and I think that's what we're all talking about now. So let's do it, because they are worthy of a place in the market, definitely. I mean, I think one caveat I would say from selling to retail and less for the on trade, and there's been a lot of talk about, you know, by the glass options, but I think for the off trade, white blends are a more challenging trade sell, particularly from an unknown region, and I think that translates into what consumers like. So, you know, I think white blends are generally a harder sell in the wine shop, and if you haven't got a reference point, I mean, I think Victoria was talking about that earlier, and I think about one of my favourite little small appellations in the Rhone, Sablé, you know, where you can go to the tourist information centre and you can try every white Sablé, and everyone is different, and they're all completely different composite notes. But unless you're a wine geek like myself and you spent the time going there and you've tried every one, you know, you don't know what they're like. So it's like, I think that's part of the challenge that Luberon has. And maybe for the white side, they've got a great opportunity. The whites are very food friendly. There's good opportunities for pairing. I mean, I've heard Josh and Matthias saying that they're interested in them. So, you know, potentially they could do more with that in the on-trade sector, and maybe with a handful of specialist off-trade retailers that are really focused on, you know, hand selling and that kind of thing.
Brilliant.
I can say some similar to this with Savoie, where the bulk is consumed locally by tourists, and the rosé probably is the same thing. But what attracts the UK and the export market are the small, interesting, smaller growers, which I think they are the ones selling an export market, really, with the quality ones.
It'd be interesting to get some opinions on blind tasting with these, because I think they'd be quite surprising results, possibly.
Yeah, Matt, we started with your appraisal of the area. Can you, based on what the panel has been talking about, what's your sort of final thought?
I think it's good to see so much positivity around the wines. I mean, you know, I tasted the wines myself, and I thought these are all good, you know, and to hear that echoed by you guys, you know, it's good to hear that. For me, it's a region that I like, that I like a lot, you know. I sometimes think, is it just because I lived there? You know, is that why these wines resonate with me? And obviously that's not the only thing. There's quality there as well. I think the only thing from my perspective that the Luberon wines need to work on a little bit more, perhaps, is consumer recognition. I still don't think that the Luberon says enough or anything particularly specific enough to UK wine drinkers over here. So I think that's an area that they could perhaps focus on a little bit. But there's certainly the wine to back it up.
Yeah, great, thank you. And well, thank you, Matt, in particular, for your expertise at the beginning and just your comments on the wine as well. So we really appreciate your local knowledge, as it were. Yeah, and lots of food for thought, and sort of bringing this to get to the end, really, just to say thanks a lot to all the panel, and really appreciate some really great commercial thoughts as well as the stylistic approaches. And I think that's the key thing here is you know, all being professional wine buyers in yourself, and being able to sort of recognise where the opportunities might be, the pluses and cool little minuses, but overall, I think the quality has really shone through. Appreciate all those watching haven't been able to taste the wines, but you'll be able to read them below in this article about where you can do. And yeah, thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody on the panel for coming and joining in today. Cheers.
Well, Richard. Thanks, Richard.
Cheers, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.
guys.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.